My ex-wife, Angela, who had cheated and left our family years ago, unexpectedly showed up at my door with another man's child, saying she wanted to be a family again. I didn't hesitate. I shut the door in her face. Here's some context. Angela and I met in our mid-20s, both working at the same firm. After dating for 2 years, we got married, and 3 years later, we were parents to 2 daughters, now aged 9 and 7. Our second daughter wasn't planned, and while Angela was initially unhappy about the pregnancy, she ultimately decided to go through with it. I had assured her that I would support any choice she made. Things between us were great after our first daughter was born, but after the second, everything changed. Angela became withdrawn, irritable, and often snapped at me or our oldest daughter. I thought her moods were hormonal and tried to adapt, hoping things would eventually improve, but they only worsened, and soon, my daughter and I were tiptoeing around her just to avoid conflict. Although she had become a stay-at-home mom by choice, Angela showed no interest in household responsibilities, especially after our second daughter arrived. We had to hire a housekeeper, an extra expense that stretched our budget thin, given my income at the time. Still, I hoped Angela would step back into her role after some rest. But months went by, and nothing changed. She barely interacted with the kids or handled household duties. I often came home from work to find her watching television while the kids were left to their own devices, or even sent out with our neighbor. Despite my best efforts to balance work and house chores, Angela refused to take any accountability. Eventually, I confronted her, explaining we couldn't afford the housekeeper indefinitely and that I needed her to pitch in more around the house. She accused me of making excuses for not earning enough and dismissed my concerns, insisting I was the problem. When I pointed out that she wasn't even caring for the kids herself, she erupted, accusing me of spying on her through the housekeeper. The confrontation escalated, and she said some harsh things, accusing me of being a loser and blaming me for not being man enough to support a housekeeper for her comfort. Frustrated, I called her out for neglecting our children and failing as a mother and wife. That hit a nerve, and she shoved me hard enough that I fell onto the coffee table, breaking it and injuring myself. I ended up in the ER, and from that moment, I no longer felt safe having her around our kids. I insisted she move out, asking my parents to care for our daughters until she left. Angela resisted and pleaded for another chance, but my trust was shattered. After a week of back and forth, we agreed that she would stay with her parents and begin therapy. Only when her therapist felt she was stable would I even consider letting her return. We started marriage counseling while living separately, but her involvement was inconsistent. Meanwhile, I learned she had been unfaithful. My parents moved in to help with the girls, while Angela stayed with hers. Her therapist later informed me that Angela was struggling with postpartum depression, which gave me hope that maybe things could improve with the right support. After several months, she began having supervised visits with the girls. For a brief time, it felt like there was a chance. But soon, she stopped showing up for counseling, and her communication with me became sparse. Her therapist assured me she was progressing, but I rarely heard from her directly. After months of silence and unreturned calls, I decided to visit her at her parents' place to see if she was all right. When I arrived, her parents blamed me for everything, saying I was the cause of her issues. Angela, too, told me not to come back to avoid any more tension between us. Still, her recent erratic behavior raised alarms. One day, I disregarded her request and decided to go check on her again because something felt very wrong. When I showed up at her parents' house, I had expected Angela to be at her parents' house, but she wasn't. When I asked her parents where she was, they coldly informed me that they couldn't say and shut the door in my face. The whole interaction left me uneasy, so I decided to call her right there. I dialed her number repeatedly, but she didn't pick up, which only made me more paranoid. Determined to find out what was going on, I quietly moved around to the backyard, knowing they often kept the kitchen door unlocked. But before I even got to the door, I saw her. Angela was in the backyard, sitting on a swing, her back to me. She wasn't alone, she was with a man I didn't recognize, and they were making out. My stomach turned as I watched, my heart pounding. It was a moment I couldn't erase, no matter how hard I've tried. The man pulled away when he noticed me, and Angela turned around, her expression shifting to shock. I didn't say a word, I just turned and walked back toward my car. Angela hurried after me, trying to explain, but I could barely hear her over the buzzing in my head. She reached for my arm, but I shook her off and told her not to touch me. I got in my car and drove home in silence, in shock. As soon as I got home, I blocked her everywhere. I asked my parents to help me find a lawyer and explained what had happened. From that day forward, I had no interest in hearing her side of the story. By the time we had to meet for the court-appointed mediation, I had shut down emotionally, operating on autopilot for the sake of my daughters. Eventually, Angela chose to terminate her parental rights. She admitted she wanted to be with Sean, the man I'd seen her with. I learned from her family that Sean was an old friend she'd reconnected with when she moved back in with her parents. They claimed Angela was finally choosing herself, as though she hadn't already been doing exactly that. Her parents even seemed relieved, supportive of her new beginning with Sean. Our divorce process was long and grueling, with Angela trying to claim alimony despite having abandoned our family. Thankfully, my lawyer and I managed to protect what I had worked for, ensuring she walked away empty-handed. Those months were brutal, but I pushed through for my daughters, my only family. My parents moved in to help, and I'll always be grateful for their support during that time. Now, 5 years later, life is stable, my career is going well, my daughters are thriving, and I was in a much better place emotionally. I had put Angela and that painful chapter behind me, or so I thought. One morning, just as I was about to leave for work, the doorbell rang. To my shock, it was Angela, standing there with a young boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, clearly her son. I barely had time to process what was happening before she started crying, saying she wanted to make amends and be a family again. Without hesitation, I told her, firmly, that she was no longer part of this family. She'd forfeited that right the day she chose to be with Sean. Then I shut the door, hearing her sobs on the other side. For a moment, I was tempted to curse her out, but I held back, mostly because of the little boy. Later that day, as I got home, I was hit with an unexpected call from my parents. They demanded an explanation for why I had turned Angela away. Apparently, Angela had reached out to them after I shut the door, and they were the ones who'd encouraged her to come, thinking it was time for her to be part of the girls' lives again. They'd even given her my address and told her what to say. I was stunned. My parents argued that it was about time I put my daughter's needs first and let Angela back in their lives. They genuinely believed she deserved a second chance and that she could be the mother my daughters needed. Furious, I told them it was reckless of them to make that decision without asking me, especially when they knew what Angela had put us through. But they didn't back down, insisting that as grandparents, they had a say in what was best for the kids. It was absurd. Yes, they had been there for us through the worst of it, and I was endlessly thankful for that. But at the end of the day, these were my daughters, not theirs. While I respected and appreciated them, they had crossed a line. I didn't think it was my parents' place to bring Angela back into my life. We had a heated argument about it, but they insisted I was being selfish for not giving her another chance. They claimed they had done their due diligence and were certain she had changed, that she deserved to be part of my daughters' lives again. Even when I reminded them that she had signed away her parental rights, they accused me of being arrogant, saying it was insulting to believe they would put my daughters or me in harm's way. They argued that I was ruining their lives by refusing to accept that they needed their mother. It's been a few days since that argument, and I stand by my decision. I don't believe I'm being unreasonable for not wanting to give my ex-wife a second chance. Update 1. A week has passed since Angela showed up at my door with her son, and I recently uncovered the disturbing truth about her relationship with my parents. It's hard to even wrap my head around it, and I'm still processing how they all betrayed me without a second thought. Not only did they give her my new address, but they had been in touch with her all along. I had cut her out of my life after the divorce, but they hadn't done the same because they believed she would eventually want to reconnect. Their conversations were infrequent, just once a month, but that was enough to make me feel utterly betrayed. Angela had been coerced by Sean into signing away her parental rights after the divorce papers were served. He had given her an ultimatum: abandon her family and start anew with him, or maintain contact with her kids and risk losing him. My parents told me that Angela contacted them soon after I filed for divorce, asking for their help. She claimed she felt trapped and feared she wouldn't see her children again. While I fought for full custody with supervised visitation rights, Sean pressured her to sever ties with her kids completely. Even if Angela had fought for custody, the chances of her winning were slim, given the circumstances surrounding our divorce and her history of emotional issues. My parents explained that she felt backed into a corner, and they met with her privately. Angela begged them to help her maintain contact with our daughters. knowing full well that once she signed her rights away, she wouldn't have visitation rights. My parents planned to exploit their position as grandparents to bridge that gap. Behind my back, they facilitated Angela's visits with the girls, even deceiving me into believing she was just a friend of theirs. Whenever I dropped the kids off, they invited her over, and my daughters never mentioned these meetings. Instead, they referred to Angela as their grandparents' friend, which I naively assumed meant one of my parents' acquaintances. It turns out they had instructed the girls to refer to her that way if I asked. I felt betrayed not only by my parents but by my daughters as well. Yet, I forgave them because they were just kids, manipulated by Angela and my parents into keeping this secret. After I learned the truth, I asked my daughters if they had been meeting their mother behind my back. They cried and said they feared punishment from God if they told me the truth. I couldn't believe I had never asked my daughters about the friends they were spending time with. It could have been someone dangerous, and I would have been none the wiser. But now, I'm putting an end to this. I'm getting a restraining order against all of them. I have written proof since my parents sent me an email outlining the truth after our fight. They believed the email would convince me of Angela's desperation to be a mother. Instead, it confirmed that I could no longer trust any of them. Angela had signed away her parental rights and resorted to meeting our children in secret because Sean wouldn't allow her contact with her previous family. Now they're getting divorced, even though they have a son together. According to my parents, Sean wants nothing to do with Angela or their child since he has a job opportunity elsewhere. Angela didn't want to leave, which led to a long and contentious battle, culminating in Sean deciding he was done with her 3 months ago. Update 2. Thank you all for your concern and support. My parents and Angela have been served with restraining orders and are scheduled to appear in court soon. I've blocked them on every platform, informed friends not to communicate with them, and heightened security around my home. I spoke to my daughter's school to ensure their safety, and teachers are closely monitoring them. For now, things are calm, and I hope the restraining order keeps them at bay. Update 3. We got the restraining order. For the next 5 years, my parents and Angela must stay away from me and my daughters or face serious consequences. I'm maintaining all my security measures, as they appeared angry the last time I saw them, and I refuse to take any chances. My daughters and I are attending regular family counseling sessions, making significant progress. All I want is for my daughters to be happy, so please continue sending us your best wishes. We need all the support we can get.